Let's continue our coverage of the life and legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I want to bring in Ilya Shapiro. He's the director of the Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute. Good to see you, Ilya. So, as you know, over the past few days, many have reflected on Justice Ginsburg's fight for equality, her sense of humor, her friendship specifically with Justice Antonin Scalia that rose above political ideology. I want to ask you about that, but before I do, talk to me about what stands out to you with regards to her career, her life, and her legacy.
Well, sure. She was a path-breaking lawyer. Many people have called her the Thurgood Marshall of the women's legal movement for women's equality and going against sex discrimination. Justice Scalia, her old pal, wrote in Time magazine 5 years ago about that. And her good nature, her professionalism, paving the way, not just for women lawyer and judges, but professionals of all kinds. And you can agree or disagree with her judicial opinions. The last 10, 15 years, she's been in dissent far more than in the majority and been lionized for that. In fact, there's a lot of parallels between her passing now and Justice Scalia 4 years ago.
You mentioned the fact that she has been in the dissent for quite some time. Give me a sense of some of her major rulings that were part of her time as a justice, notably in 2013 when she wrote that scathing dissent to the Supreme Court actions on the Voting Rights Act.
Well, sure. Her best-known majority opinion is probably in Virginia versus United States, which required Virginia's military academy, VMI, to admit female cadets. Her dissents, the Shelby County case in 2013, where disabling one provision of the Voting Rights Act was like throwing away an umbrella when because you're no longer getting wet. Now, I personally disagreed with that analogy. I've written about that, but definitely a famous one. Also in the Lilly Ledbetter case on employment discrimination, about when you can sue when you find out about disparities in pay based on gender. That Congress ended up reversing that statutory interpretation of the majority, the first piece of legislation that President Obama signed in his administration. The travel ban case, Trump versus Hawaii, that was she along with Justice Sotomayor, that was one of the cases where they went even further than Justice Kagan and Breyer. There were a lot of 7-2 cases where she was in the dissenting end. And always, I see your picture now showing her jabot, or neck doily, as some people say it. There was a particular one that she wore when she was reading a passionate dissent from the bench. And that's all became part of her mystique as she became the notorious RBG and featured on Saturday Night Live skits. Definitely a progressive heroine.
You mentioned, I mentioned her friendship with the late Justice Antonin Scalia, and I was talking, I had an interview yesterday with Erin Cameron, who wrote the book Notorious RBG, and I asked her about that friendship, and I said it in the context, Ilya, which I'll do for you, in the context of where we are in this country right now, where you are seeing individuals, people fighting with their own family members over politics, over some of the things that have transpired over the last 3 or 4 years. You see friends breaking off relationships with people that they used to get along with because of some of these positions. And I've always sort of been concerned about that and curious about it, because you looked at Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, and they were as opposed on the ideological spectrum as you could possibly be opposed, and yet they got together. They shared a love of opera together, and they were photographed hanging out. Their families hung out together, and it just made me, I don't know. I sort of think, well, if the individuals who are ultimately responsible for the laws of the land can set aside their political differences, and maybe they didn't talk about politics, or they didn't talk about their decisions when they were having a glass of wine and listening to Vivaldi. But I wonder if there's some light there at the end of the tunnel for people who may be struggling with that.
Well, there was certainly a throwback, and I think it's a very unfortunate trend in our society that people are breaking off friendships or having rifts in the family over politics. I mean, there are more important things. There's a famous vignette where Justice Scalia would always give Justice Ginsburg roses or other flowers on her birthday. And one of his more successful former clerks, obviously plenty of clerks have gone on to great success, Jeff Sutton, who's a judge, a federal judge on the Sixth Circuit, said, "Well, Judge, how many votes do these flowers really buy?" And Justice Scalia said, "Well, there are things more important in life than votes." I really hope that if your neighbor is displaying a lawn sign that's of the opposing party or something you disagree with, that you can still go over and have a beer or watch football or have your kids play in the backyard together. I mean, really, politics should not be dividing us as a society as it is, even in this polarized time. But perhaps, unfortunately, that Ginsburg-Scalia friendship is a throwback, much like their confirmations, where Ginsburg was confirmed 96-3, Scalia was confirmed unanimously back in 1986. That certainly is a throwback in terms of the votes that we can expect, whether on this nomination or any others.
Yeah, it's a good point that you make, Ilya. And perhaps now Ginsburg and Scalia will be mentioned much in the same way that O'Neill and Reagan was or has been when we talk about people with opposing views getting together and ultimately hammering out some agreements. Ilya Shapiro, always great to have you, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks. And you can read more about all this in my book that's coming out tomorrow, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court.
I am looking forward to that because there's no one that I enjoy talking more about the Supreme Court than you, Ilya. So looking forward to that. Supreme Disorder comes out tomorrow.
Hey, Vlad, can I mention one more thing?
Yeah.
So what's interesting about RBG's confirmation is that there were fears that she was not pro-choice enough. You talked with Nancy about the way the abortion dynamic in Roe v. Wade played. I think there's some nuance there because most Americans are not 100% pro-choice, no excuse abortion until birth, nor 100% pro-life. They're somewhere in the middle, and so the parties try to play for that middle. But anyway, Justice Ginsburg said that Roe v. Wade was premature, and the court's handling of it contributed to the controversy and the division in our country going forward. And because of that speech about 6 months before her confirmation hearing, pro-choice advocates were concerned about her. I mean, now it seems ridiculous or amazing that RBG was ever questioned on that, but it just shows the nuanced legal mind that she had. And indeed, that how the court goes about doing things is just as important as what the ultimate ruling is.
That's a great point, and I'd forgotten that. I think I read it just over the weekend, passing, Ilya, that moment, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, yes, I distinctly recall that there were some liberal groups who actually protested her nomination back then because of that very reason. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you, Ilya.
Thank you. Take care, Vlad.
You too.